Hello and welcome everyone to another IoT Central webinar. I'm David O'Hara and I'm the Managing Director at IoT Central. I'd like to thank RevX Systems for sponsoring today's webinar. RevX Systems is a leading supporter of the IoT Central community and we're grateful to have them as sponsors. Today's webinar is titled IoT Cheat Codes, Unlocking the Key to Monetization and Scale. First, let me review the format of today's event. It will be 30 minutes long. We have two guests who you'll meet in just a moment, and there'll be a Q&A session. Please submit questions during the presentation using the control panel. I'll present your questions during the Q&A portion of the event. Now, I'd like to introduce our guests. Robert Entrican is the founder and CTO at RevX Systems. Interviewing Robert is Genesis Lee, Head of Partnerships and Business Development. Robert and Genesis, welcome. When you're ready, let's get started.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the intro. Everyone, thank you for joining us. I am really excited to get started. And since we have a lot to cover, I thought we'd jump straight into it. Is that all right, Robert?
Sounds great to me.
Okay. So I thought that we would start with something super simple with this interview. And since we are all here to learn about monetizing and scaling our IoT solutions, would you mind sharing with us, Robert, the most common ways to think about IoT solution? What are the main elements of an IoT solution?
Great solution and a great idea. It always helps to kind of start from the same point of view. So from our standpoint, you know, the basic building blocks of an IoT solution are really your network, which I typically refer to as the carrier, or fondly refer to as the carrier. And then you've got your product, which is your feature set, the things that customers are willing to pay for. And then you've got your device. It's this sort of inanimate thing that does stuff. We call it either turns, clicks, or spins of something that you combine with an app to actually create a service worth people paying for. So those are really the three elements of a solution that we call the commodity of the IoT service provider.
We used to call that the DNA of IoT, which is your device, network, and application.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main theme is that you have those three elements to think about, and as you pointed out, you should be thinking about each of those separately or combined when you're thinking about monetizing your IoT solution.
Absolutely, they're all equally critical. The device, you have to obviously understand if it's LTE-M, if it's narrowband, if it's 5G. You know, those are details that are super important. Not only that, but when you're dealing with cross-carrier or multi-carrier go-to-market strategies, you've got the different personas and different ways and workflows that different carriers think about what it means to activate a device. So there are definitely nuances that deserve each element deserves unique attention.
Well, you may remember we actually surveyed all of the audience as they registered for this webinar. And so I thought that we would ask you the same question, and then what I'll do is I will reveal the results of the survey as the audience submitted. So we'll start with you, Robert. The million-dollar question is, what are the top two challenges that you see in companies or partner companies that they typically face when trying to monetize and scale their IoT solution?
Great question, and I won't necessarily respond from the list of options that the respondents may have had to choose from, because I'm drawing on empirical evidence of what our customers seem to struggle with, either post-implementation or a year down the road. They've got, you know, customers under their belt, they've got operational experience, and fundamentally we see across the board servicing revenue at scale can be quite a challenge. You know, it might seem simple on the surface, but the devil's always in the details. So servicing revenue at scale, and secondly, responding to change. You know, you can put all this effort in up front, define what your products are, define the feature set, define the price points, and that's great for maybe 3 months, 6 months, maybe even 12 if you're lucky, but eventually a disruptive change is going to roll through and you have to be able to respond to it. So you need that operational agility to be able to do that.
Yeah, automation in place so that you're not trying to make a change and also manage manual operations.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Well, I think I will go ahead and share the results of the survey. So let me just remind the audience the question. And that was actually, let me just make sure I've got my screen so I can share. One moment. I'm just making sure I am sharing my main screen. Okay. So the question to the audience was, what are the two main challenges that your company or partner companies face when trying to monetize and scale their IoT solution? And so we had several options. Let me go ahead and share with you here of the top two challenges that you as the audience are commonly coming across, which make up almost 50% of the results, are articulating clear value and possible ROI that's meaningful to the customer, and determining the most appropriate pricing model. So if those sound familiar, we're going to talk a little bit more about those, as well as the challenges that Robert just brought up as well. All right, Robert, any comments on these top two challenges?
Absolutely. Articulating clear value and the ROI is kind of a nuanced conversation, whether it's a consumer device or an industrial device. The conversation typically tends to be pretty different in those market segments. But the one that's universally the same and equally challenging is determining the most appropriate pricing model. We always work with customers in the very beginning and say, it's one thing to sell a device based on either a megabyte or a gigabyte or, some abstract network measurement. But once we start the conversation kind of evolving and talk about, let's price based on your device's event capabilities or its functional attributes, that's where you start to really define a sustainable and high growth product, because not only does it connect with the subscribers or the individual end users in terms of what kind of value are they going to get from the device, but it also cultivates a thought process that sort of feeds into the idea of evolving the pricing model over time. So you don't have to commit to an upfront way of selling in exchange for being able to change that down the road.
I like it. So as your business is changing, your needs are changing, the flexibility to make those changes without having to reinvent the wheel is really important.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Critical
Well,
to survival.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into this topic. I will bring us back up here, and if you don't mind sharing with us some of the pricing models that we should be aware of and thinking about, whether it's now or down the road, to have that flexibility to make some changes.
Absolutely. Some of the typical things we see, just because as businesses begin to have those conversations around pricing, peeling the onion, as they say, it can become a complicated conversation, and we see some businesses fall back on this 90s style freemium model where they'll just bake connectivity into the cost of a device off the retail shelf, or they'll give a free window of data up front. So what we really advocate for is invest in a system that lets you define any unit of measure that you think your device is capable of generating, and then come up with billing rules that are all rules-based to essentially infinitely monetize that device in ways that you might not imagine on day one, but could very easily imagine on day 720.
Yeah, definitely. Any other models that should be taken into consideration?
Into consideration, one of the things we always strive to do is to kind of break customers out of the data plan mindset. Separate the device from a data plan. Not everything fits into a data plan kind of box. So if you've got like a security gate for a commercial complex, the facilities manager might not know, okay, I've got X amount of traffic. Is that a 10 megabyte plan? Is it a 500 megabyte plan? So think about your pricing models from an event standpoint, and you know, kind of stop thinking about the data plan part of it, because you'll inherently limit your revenue collection capabilities, and it kind of boxes you into a way of thinking.
I think that is a lot of the challenge for our customers and partners that we're working with, that, you know, they're really trying to think creatively and break outside of the box of the way that they're managing their own connectivity and devices and plans, and be able to provide a different look or outlook on the whole offering bundled together.
Right.
Great. So I know that we talked through the challenges that our audience is commonly coming across. Can you share with us a little bit about some of the more interesting, or I would say, in the way it's been done right, a model that has been that you have worked with and has been a success?
Absolutely. I think the first one that comes to mind, and it happens to be particularly challenging because it's a consumer electronic that brings about challenges related to selling through channels. So you've got a device that's sitting on the shelf at Costco or Sam's Club, Walmart, or you're selling it online through a distribution warehouse. And when you combine that with trying to sell it based on its capabilities, in this case, I'm talking about a trail camera. Trail camera market is quite big, and it's really evolving into remote video surveillance. And it's these devices that are either battery powered, solar powered, that have a 5G or LTE or Cat-M module in them. And they're becoming far more sophisticated. So they're doing things like image AI processing. I want to receive alerts anytime, you know, a human approaches my front gate, as opposed to bear, deer, or sheep. So combining events that charge for AI features, photo counts, things of that nature, really empower the service provider to connect with their end user, because they're providing a service to the end user that's priced around 1,000 photos or 200 AI events or 200 AI alerts. That makes a lot more sense to a subscriber than buying a camera that's got 100 megabytes of data. How many pictures is that? You know, it's hard for them to connect those dots.
And what I hear is also a unique way to position themselves and stand out among competitors.
Absolutely. Yeah. Pricing as a competitive differentiator is going to be fundamental and paramount to a lot of service providers. As you get more competition within each of these vertical segments, it's going to be critical for the standouts to really offer competitive bundles in such a way that people look at it and say, wow, okay, that's pretty unique. That's for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, so I know that we've talked a little bit about some of the major challenges, the major elements of an IoT solution, some of the business models and pricing structures that should be considered. So what are 3 major takeaways that you would want our audience to walk away with that they could put into practice immediately today?
So so the 3 major practice, or 3 big practices, if I'm staying true to the theme of servicing revenue at scale and responding to change, then any service provider that's going to market, whether it's an industrial play, B2B or B2C, you've got to have the ability to provide downstream device management. Now, the carriers will provide great tools, you know, but that's meant for the back office of the service provider. It's not a solution for the service provider's customers to be able to self-manage their own devices, their own SIMs, their own subscriptions. And then as an add-on to that, the ability for the end user to be able to manage their own billing relationship, their own software entitlements, the subscription levels, look at history, pay bills, all in one integrated experience. Ultimately, you have to provide a solution that enables that subscriber to self-manage without having to pick up the phone. And that doesn't mean that some subscribers won't want to. Some people just love to talk on the phone, but giving them those tools to self-manage really creates subscriber loyalty and stickiness. And then I think the last piece of that, the three-legged stool, is, as my partner likes to say, having policy-based revenue collection. So what we mean by that is having a system that's smart enough to know that when a subscriber's bill cycle comes around and a bill needs to be paid or a credit card processed, that when that fails, because they do, that you have a defined policy that says, okay, you're going to go from an active status into a past due, and it's going to stay in that past due, and we're going to notice you either with SMS messages or emails or alerts in the application that remind you there's a balance due. So, and if at 7 days or 10 days, whatever your policy is, you may choose to interrupt service or temporarily throttle service. So having a policy-based revenue collection model kind of rounds out the offering there to make sure that you don't have to build this big army of back office human capital to collect that revenue from end users. The system does all the work so that you're left with just the exceptions.
Awesome. So, okay, just to recap, you would recommend having the ability to bill downstream device management, give end users tools for billing and device management. That's outside of the device and connectivity portal. The third to the three-legged stool, as you called it, a policy-based subscriber revenue collection.
Absolutely. If you've got those three, I think you've got the key ingredients to a scalable, sustainable, and potentially highly profitable service provider offering.
Which brings us back to the first challenge that you brought up, which is that scalability and manual processes.
Absolutely, and we see that all too often. It's either human capital or it's internally built systems which struggle in the face of being able to respond to change. You know, internal systems oftentimes they serve a great purpose up front. They're tempting because they have the appearance of being low cost, but in the big picture, they're far more expensive. And one of the old sayings that I love to repeat it is, if you think hiring a professional is expensive, try hiring an amateur.
I like that. That's good advice. Great advice.
Yes.
So we definitely wanted to make sure that the audience had time for questions and answers with you, Q&A, and we do already have a couple of questions that have come in. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and jump into some Q&A.
Great, let's go for it.
Okay. So I wanted to just make sure that I am getting through this entire question, but you did bring up some success stories already. But what are some of the most exciting IoT deployments that you have been a part of, and why?
Wow, you know, I would say healthcare has got some pretty interesting and exciting stuff. We've got customers that have connected surgical robots that are providing either aesthetic procedures or routine like hip replacement, things like that, where you've got 3D printers and other automated instruments in the surgical rooms. Of course, healthcare and remote patient monitoring is pretty ubiquitous. It's just about everywhere you go. There's angles of senior care popping up everywhere, where it's the Life Alert or PERS markets, as they refer to them, with devices that have more robust capabilities that are designed more around senior lifestyle management. So it not only gives them that safety and security, but it gives them some value add in the watch that they're wearing as well. Aside from that, pest control, agriculture, moisture monitoring, these are literally all customers in our platforms today, providing all these services.
Thank you for sharing. Let's go to the next question, which is, what are some of the ways to avoid setbacks in the product development process when integrating IoT?
Some of the challenges we see is I think a real shortage of upfront consultative services on devices. You know, not all devices are created equal. So when you talk about device certification, you talk about getting a particular piece of equipment authorized to operate on a network. There's a lot of, I'll say, confusion around the notion of an eSIM versus a global roam SIM versus a native carrier SIM. What is an actual MNO? What's an MVNO? What are the value adds? So as painful as learning some of that vernacular may be, it's ultimately going to just pay dividends long term by kind of going through that drudgery up front and making sure that the device is well suited to the solution, whether it be battery life, deployment nuances, whether you have to use third-party fulfillment companies to ship it, and above all, resisting the urge to ship pre-activated equipment. That's kind of just a hot spot for us that we tend to harp on quite a bit, because we like to parallel those to a lot of little like blank checks that just get shipped out. So when a SIM leaves the warehouse, if it's in a pre-active state, it might as well be a blank signed check. You know, it's a liability.
Those are really, really good points and excellent feedback. I love this question. How should we think about subscription pricing models over time? Won't they just go up over time?
It depends on how engaged your user community is, honestly. I find that boring pricing models tends to create very quiet subscriber pools. But if you have creative pricing that actually draws people in, that is more a la carte, the users tend to be stickier. I say that the temptation is always there to try and launch with an unlimited model. And many of our customers will go to market with an unlimited in a way to capture that subscriber, get them onboarded, get them using the product. And once that subscriber becomes more comfortable with their own usage profile, they then want options. They might decide, you know what, all you can eat isn't really right for me. I need this feature, and this feature. It kind of goes from an unlimited to an a la carte. So having both in your wheelhouse is essential to customer retention.
Yeah, I love that. And thinking about just having some variability and options, not just package subscriptions that, you know, ultimately will.
And I will add one caveat to that. We have had customers in the past get a little too ambitious, and so I would say too much pricing can lead to subscriber confusion a little bit, but there is a balance there.
Yeah, and I've actually heard you consult with customers utilizing RevX in an ideal number of products and pricing options to even offer to the end customer, because it can get confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So this question, we may need more details, but I'll go ahead and pose it here. Could you explain a little more about multi-carrier and how it works? I believe the question is how to enable multi-carriers utilizing a billing and revenue system.
Great question, and this is really kind of the one of our mainstays. So there's this phrase that's used throughout this industry called the single pane of glass, and that single pane of glass refers to that operational capability of federating all of the different carriers you might have to go to market with. And when I say have to go to market with, you might be servicing urban and rural areas, or even on the international stage, you've got fragmentation of carriers in lots of different parts of the world. So as a result, you're forced to either do business with an MVNO who can bring all those carriers to you in one little bundle, or if you want, if you have the appetite for going directly to lots of different carriers, then you need a system that lets you bring those carrier platforms into your environment, whether you've got a BSS or OSS or a RevX solution. you need a system that has the ability to present a user experience so that the user knows, okay, I'm buying a device and I want to turn it on T-Mobile, or I want to turn it on Vodafone or Verizon or AT&T. You know, not all of our customers wish to expose the carrier labels like that. Some do, some don't, but it's important that you be able to do it, because if you can't, then you're stuck with this very rigid single tenant kind of carrier model that limits you based on their coverage footprint.
Excellent. Well, I think we do have time for one more question. So I'll go ahead and pose this last question. If you have more questions, please let them come in. So in your experience, Robert, what have you seen as one of the more common ways that that our customers may have not looked into the future and considered when scaling their IoT solution? So this question is, what are some common mistakes that could be avoided when looking at scale?
I would say that's also a great question, and it's quite likely I could really strike a nerve with some of our viewers here, but there's always a conversation that needs to take place around the idea of, when you sell a product, do you want to sell it in such a way that they use the entitlement up and then the product shuts off? Or do you allow them to use it up to the entitlement and then begin to accrue an overage, much like in a conventional carrier model? If you've got a 5 megabyte hotspot plan, or if I'm sorry, 5 gigabyte hotspot plan, and you go over, you pay a certain amount over in megs or gigs. And then lastly, just the sort of true up or re-up model, where if they're signing up for something and that entitlement is either 100 megabytes or 100 gate opens, and they've used that entitlement up, and you simply want to renew it, more of like making a prepaid feel like a postpaid. I don't think that conversation can be had enough because it has impacts on the end user. And when I say impacts on the end user, if you don't plan that user journey properly, it can lead to customer contact. So the customer that's left confused, they pick up the phone and call, or they open a ticket with you. And if you're selling a $10 a month product, you can't afford to talk to your customers very often. It squeezes all the profitability out of it.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you so much. All right, so I think that was it for our Q&A. I want to thank IoT Central for hosting us today. And Robert, thank you so much for letting me interview you.
Absolutely. I think it was nice, Genesis. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Robert and Genesis. That was valuable, very interesting, good conversation. So this brings our webinar to a close. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and especially Robert, Genesis, and RevX Systems for their sponsorship. You can view more webinars and workshops on iotcentral.io. Thank you again for everyone attending, and have a great day.